Hello, and welcome to this episode of SelfKind with me, Erica Webb, and my guest today. I am really excited about this conversation. I've actually been wanting to ask Virginia on for quite some time, and I'm really excited to have this conversation. So welcome to Virginia, who is a professional organiser. So we are going to dive into a conversation in a moment, but welcome, Virginia. How are you?
I'm pretty good. Thanks for having me on. I've been listening to your podcast for a little while.
Oh, I love that. I love it. So, Virginia, I just mentioned that you're obviously a professional organiser. You have a business called WellSorted, which I love. I would not describe myself as particularly well sorted, so I'm excited to have this conversation with you. Not that we're going to solve my problems, but before we sort of hit record, we were talking about maybe diving down the path of talking about decluttering as an act of self-care. But before we get there, do you want to give us a little bit more of an introduction about, who you are and what you do? And I would love to know a little bit about what kind of led you to being a professional organiser.
Yeah, sure. So I'm here in Canberra. I run a decluttering and organising business and have been in business since 2013. I help usually overwhelmed and busy women. Mainly, I've got a handful of male clients as well to declutter and organise their home and life. I'm generally doing this in person, like one-to-one in people's homes. I do Zoom sessions as well for those outside of Canberra. And I work alongside people to help decide what's important in their house and their life and sort of really just work through those items. So I guess more recently I have also taken on clinical emotional freedom technique. So that's somatic body practice, I guess, to help reduce your stress and cortisol levels. But I sort of see it as an add-on to the decluttering and organising to declutter your mind and body of stuff. So a newer tool that I have over the last year or so, but I sort of can use it in sessions with people as well when we're decluttering physically.
I love that. That was one thing I was really struck by actually when I was reading your bio, was the notion that it's not just about decluttering spaces. This idea also of decluttering our schedules, of decluttering our emotional sort of load. I think that's fascinating because it's not something I think of actually when I think of decluttering, particularly around like the schedule, and our lives as a general kind of concept. Sometimes I think we can feel so very trapped in those things and, trapped with our stuff too. I know I was just telling you the room that I'm sitting in has been my personal little project recently, and I'm deeply overwhelmed by it at this point because it's just it can be so confronting to be faced with not only the things that we've collected over the years, but like making decisions about what to do with stuff. So I mean, well, first question, what led you to become, have you just always been organised? Are you just an organised person? Like, what led you here? What brought you to this place?
Look, I'm on the SelfKind podcast, so I can probably, this is something that I don't really go around talking about too much, but I got into it mainly because, as a child, because it helps regulate my emotions. It's having things in order and having things in place. Just if I'm feeling stressed or overwhelmed, makes me feel better within myself that I have control over something. So I guess that's why I was drawn to it as a child, and it is something that I have done ever since I can remember. My parents. Well, my mum would sort of get a bit annoyed with me because I'd sort of end up tossing out stuff that she wanted, like my drawings as a child or something. She's like, "Oh, they were my precious treasures," but I wanted to, get rid of things and make space. And I would often go to my friends' houses and they'd be like, "What are we going to do?" And I'd say, "Let's do your wardrobe." And they'd be like, "All right, sure." So I was excited. They were.
That
So
is so fun. I love that so much. I have to laugh though because I've got the opposite problem with my kids, where it's like literally everything is the most important thing they've ever created in their whole lives,
yeah.
and gosh, it's hard to figure out what to do with that. So I feel like, little Virginia, maybe gave your mum some grief throwing everything out, but also like, wow, what a gift.
And look, we can talk about some strategies with kids and sentimental things
Yes.
and helping them let go as time goes on too.
Oh, I'd love that. So what I would love to start with is like, what is your take on why we kind of end up in this cycle of clutter and this cycle of like accumulation purge is what it feels like anyway to
Mm.
me, where, we kind of get overwhelmed by our things or overwhelmed by, and maybe we just stick with things because I feel like it's slightly different maybe to like our schedules and things, but like, do you have any thoughts? I'm sure you do, but what are your thoughts on kind of how we end up a little bit controlled by our things?
Mm. Well, even today I was just reading some articles on our consumerism and how the way that we're all living at the moment. It's everything's really accessible to us. We have a lot more things today than we did, even 5 years ago. And I think I might have the statistic wrong, but it was like on average we've got like 30,000 or 300,000 items in each home or something, like a ridiculous amount of stuff.
Yeah.
So that amount of those items and having decisions in each of those spaces being your cupboard of mugs versus your
Mm.
clothes and so on and so forth, all of those decisions each day it just creates more overwhelm for us, more decisions to make. Which mug am I going to use? What shirt am I going to wear? That type of thing. So I mean that's how we get to the point of overwhelm, is having so much stuff.
Mm.
um, I guess something that I observe and things I talk about with my clients is being mindful of why we're purchasing, why we feel like we need something more. When we're avoiding cleaning things up, being mindful of why that is. Why are we avoiding it? And those answers give us some clues as to what's driving it for us, because it can be different for each person, really.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I was really struck by something that you had written in an email to me around this idea of like some of the deeper habits and beliefs that kind of underpin the reasons why we end up in overwhelm. And I really take your point there that it tends to be very different for each of us. One of the things that I've noticed about myself is that I'm very much like a just in case kind of person, and a reluctant discarder sometimes because of the environmental impact of that. Like, I'm like,
Mm.
well, I've got it now. I don't want to, sort of throw it out into landfill or whatever.
Yeah.
What other, and I think sometimes as well, like that feeling of obligation for holding on to things that perhaps we've been gifted, or
Mm.
things that, should be important, like that idea of like the artwork, right, as a kid, or,
Yeah.
I have, I'm not even joking, a stack of at least 30, if not 40 workbooks from my kids' schools that I'm like, what do I do with these things? And the problem is that we get so many years into that, right? Like, I'm like, that's 2 years worth of my kids' books that, they're only in primary school. Is there like a I don't know, I guess like a top 3, top 5 kind of what underpins this for a lot of us? Or is it really, do you find that it's like really hugely varied across the board?
No, I think I should have this blog handy because
Ah,
I did identify 4, but I'm like, will I remember all 4 types of
ah,
clutter? I mean, there's certainly usually there's some sort of feeling underlying each of the different types of clutter that I've noticed most in people's homes, and you've said 2 of them, so you've got the or maybe even 3. So you've got the just in case, and that has the fear of well, what if I don't have this? Again, if I let this go, what's going to happen? So there's like fears and anxieties that sort of underpin that style
mm,
of clutter. Then you've got the sentimental items, and again, there's usually feelings underlying that. Sentimental items for yourself might be usually good feelings. Most of us are holding on to things that make us and remind us of things that were happy in our life, and our persona, and a particular style we had, or because we go through different phases in our life, so it sort of helps pin to those parts of our lives.
Mm.
You mentioned the guilt sort of stuff as well. Presents people give us, and so we feel like we have to hold on to those. Oh, what if I got rid of it and they know, and they think that I don't appreciate their
Where is
efforts?
that present? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Or yeah, I'm like, oh, if only I had my own blog up. That's the fourth
It's all right.
one.
None of us will cross-check it and hold you to account on that one.
Yeah. So I mean, there's and so yeah, we're talking clutter wise. Otherwise, anything else in your home. So I guess I should also say that my definition of clutter is modelled off what Peter Walsh talks about, and he's Oprah Winfrey's declutter is how I describe him. He's written lots of books. He's Australian. Is that clutter is anything getting in the way of you living the life that you want to lead. So if it's useful in your life, and that can be in your, like you said at the beginning, your schedule, your diary, your to-do list, your relationships, your stuff, and your thoughts and your habits and everything like that as well. So, if you have things in your home that don't fit into that category, then they're the things that are sort of holding you back. And yes, and I think I remember one of the other one is what some people are now calling aspirational clutter. I've always called it like the promises clutter, because it's the promise of that item. So the treadmill that sits in most people's lounge rooms and becomes a clothes hanging rack is promising you, a fit body, a healthy lifestyle, potentially even this body that will attract the right, mate, and they'll be in love with you because you look so fabulous. I'm not saying that's how we should feel. I'm just saying
that's just what it represents. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's I say the promise of an item, or the cookbook that promises really close family relationships while you eat over a meal, that type of thing. Or that aspirational clutter is how other people call it, the things that you want to achieve. So I think they're the four that I usually notice that people are sort of holding on to.
Yeah, I love that. And I really love what you just said about your definition of clutter, things that get in the way of, you living the life that you want to live. That is how I think of, the work that I do too, in so many ways, which is completely different to what you do. But this idea of, kind of questioning the beliefs and the habits that sort of stop us from moving in the direction of the things that we want. And so I feel like that's a really great introduction actually to talking about how addressing these things, even when it feels very hard, can be a form of self-care and indeed self-love and self-kindness. From my perspective, it is asking us to get really honest, I guess, with the things that aren't supportive of the life that we want. But I feel like there is probably a very messy middle in that, of like, okay, well, here I am in my cluttered home with my cluttered schedule, with my cluttered thoughts about how to deal with this. Here's the life that I know I want. And that messy middle in between of like how to deal with that. So I don't have a specific question just at the moment, but what are your thoughts on that process, I suppose, of organizing and decluttering as a form of, or as an element of self-care and self-love?
Yes, well, again, there's a lot of, I guess, research and statistics floating around about how having an uncluttered space will decrease your stress and overwhelm, depression. Having a lot of things can create these sorts of things. So, on that whole obvious side, it makes it very, very clear that being decluttered supports you. So, self-care. I guess the act of decluttering itself, I mean, for some, and a lot of my clients, it creates that overwhelm. It it is stressful to acknowledge, what's going on for you with those things, to what I guess say as digesting your past and your things. So when you're going through items, you have to digest those times in your life. When you purchased it. And there might be, then you might have really bad buying habits or something. So you're actually literally having to process, oh my God, I've spent all this money and what a waste and all of that. But, when you purchased it, it might even subconsciously remind you of a period of your life, a relationship that was there at that time. What were you at uni? There could be traumas for some. It just sort of is there to be processed, and so it can be a little bit difficult to work through. However, I still think that all of that is a very important process to be aware of yourself, to give to yourself, and to then be able to move forward. Because if you've processed and let that stuff go, you're then able to move into that life that you do want. So it's an interesting one, because it's not something that I find that a lot of my clients are really excited about doing or feel that comfortable doing at the time. Most people hate it, unlike me. I love it. But they always feel so much better and so light and free after they've achieved what they wanted to for their home.
Yes, there are so many parallels with like a sort of therapeutic model of counseling as well, in terms of like there is just that process of digging up stuff that perhaps isn't comfortable, but we don't realize is kind of like running our narrative. We don't kind of even consider that, we've got these beliefs and ideas and thoughts that are getting in the way of what it is that we really want. I'm curious, you said something just then about they feel so much better at the end, kind of like when they get to where they wanted to be. How important is it to know like what we're aiming for? Because I think sometimes when I kind of attack decluttering, I do it on a real sort of wave of motivation. Not gonna lie, I had it on the weekend. Yeah, there was like a bit of an autumn cleaning kind of situation going on, and I did the Tupperware drawer and I did the pantry, and then I started in this room and kind of lost my steam. And I didn't really have a big vision at that point. It was really just like a little bit of frustration because all the Tupperware's falling out and there was stuff everywhere, and I was like, this is too much. But how important, when we think about it more from that point of view of like supporting the life we want, how important is it for us to know what we're actually aiming for? Like how important is sort of like a goal or a vision or a like how do you set those goals, I suppose, and how important are they?
Yeah, so usually when I start with a client, I do encourage that we look at the vision for the house and your life, ideally. And so we, on the physical side of things with physical clutter, we would look room by room, and I get them to ask themselves 3 questions per room, and the same 3 questions in each room. So the first question is, if you had a magic wand, what would the room look like? So in this, you can be as fanciful as you like. You don't get bogged down in like, where am I putting things and where it would live, and how would I get there and how am I going to go through all these things? It's just like, I've been called sometimes a magical pixie fairy. I think it's cute, but I do not come with a magic wand, unfortunately. But just imagine you were that and you had that wand in your hand and you could go ding and the room is suddenly looking visually the way that you would like. So that will give you an idea when you've finished the space, like your office. Have I met that? And I always use extremes with this example just to give that that clarity. Let's just say we're sitting in the typical house you see on the decluttering shows where, a lot of people refer to them as, a hoarder's house, but, that's a whole different conversation about what hoarding disorder is. But just say that very cluttered, to the ceiling full of boxes type of room. And your goal, if I say, Erica, what does your room look like once you're done? And we're pretending that you've got boxes everywhere. That end goal is to have nothing on the shelves except a vase, the typical styling magazine style of look.
Yeah.
So if you say, I want that look, and I ask you now, well, how did you go over the weekend? Then you'd be able to see that you haven't met your goal because you still have books and you have a tree in
Yep.
your
Yep.
background there. You've got a pot plant. So
Yep.
maybe not the minimalist look just yet. So it gives you a visual to tie into. And then
Mm.
the other two questions that I ask them to ask per room is what feel do you want to have in there? So each area of the house can be a bit different. Some rooms will be a bit more active. You might want it to be friendly, welcoming. There'll be different words for different people. So,
Mm.
what feel do you want it to have, and then what activities do you want to do in there, or do you do in there that you'd like to continue? Because again, if you said, I want to be able to paint in this room and I need a big easel and and then the type of painting I do is like that swinging paint bucket type thing, and so now we need a whole bunch of space. It's like, well, can you do that? No, I can't. Okay, well,
Mm-hmm.
we still haven't met your vision for this space. So it just sort of gives you something to aim towards, and then check back in on.
Mm.
Some people will need to do several passes on a space before they feel comfortable letting go of everything in there, to meet that end goal. Or it at least allows you to look back, look at the space with those goals in mind, and go, actually, I'm comfortable with the level I've gotten it to, and I'm happy
Mm.
to leave it. It's fine the way it is. So
Yes.
so that's where I start, is having that vision per space. And ideally, like I said, you're checking in with, how does that affect your life? Like, I'm looking to feel, I want the room like that because I want to have time to sit down and enjoy these activities, or I want to be able to, go and play with my kids instead of cleaning the house up all the time, or whatever it is, sort of tying you into those goals as well. So you're feeling like you're doing it for a purpose rather than, I'm just doing it
Mm.
because I should have less stuff.
Yes, and I love that you just said that, because that was kind of going to be on my next question, actually, when you mentioned about, those sort of typical decluttering and organizing shows, um, which I love. I actually love watching those shows so much. But what it makes me think of sometimes is that so often we are sort of chasing an ideal, I guess, that is maybe somebody else's, or it's kind of like what we think we should be achieving.
Yeah.
Um, and I wonder how much of the time, when you're asking those questions, like, there must be a very big difference between kind of going, well, this is what I see in the magazines versus this is truly what would be supportive of me in my life. Like, do you find that sometimes people have a hard time clarifying what is important to them versus what is important in the kind of cultural narrative, or the narrative of like what a good housekeeper looks like? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think sometimes
Yeah.
we get so caught up in like the shoulds that
Mhm.
we fail sometimes to really understand what it is that we want. And I just wonder if you see that in this environment as well.
Yeah, I think when being given those questions, I find that people get a bit excited, and can see where they want to go with their things. Probably before that, quite a bit of indecision and unsure about like what they do want. Decluttering in general, like everything you read, even what I put up, it is often focused on what can I let go of, but
Mm.
realistically, we should be asking, what do I want? And if we were able to do what the shows do, get everything out into a warehouse, lay it all out, and then just bring back in what is important to us. When you see that, you're often like, oh, I can live with this,
Mm.
and then the rest feels more comfortable to go. So yeah, it's an interesting it's an interesting thing to observe in people, the different ways that they'll be feeling, and where they're at with their stuff.
Yeah. Yes. It reminds me of like when you move house and you just don't unpack some boxes
Mm,
and you're like, oh, I guess I don't need that much.
yeah,
you know,
that's right. That's right.
definitely been there. But then it's, it's interesting. Like you can, for not everyone will be able to see this video, but like you can see behind me, I've got, several massive bookshelves behind me covered in books. And, there would be, I remember at one point there was like, I think it was maybe Marie Kondo was like, you should have no more than 30 books or something. And I'm
Yeah.
like, that is just legit straight nonsense. Like I love being surrounded by books. I visited someone's house the other day actually, who it was like a really old home, and it had books on the sort of like above the doors and like just wrapping all the way around rooms. It made me feel so happy and delighted. I was like, I could like, and I'm like home going, could I do that? Could I get shelves above my doors? Like, how could I do this? And it's such an example of, you know, you could either kind of follow the rules and be like, okay, well, I shouldn't have things that because I'm not reading them, right? Like I've read them all, but I'm not reading them currently.
Yep.
But the joy and delight that it brings me to have books in my home is just like unmatched by pretty much any other object that I have.
Okay.
So I wonder, and you might disagree. You might be like, Erica, that is just straight up too many books. But what what kind of element, I guess, does that like felt experience have as you're kind of helping someone to go through their stuff? Like, are we using joy as a indicator? Are we using utility? Are we
Mm.
using like what are we using to kind of make that determination of like what should be in my space versus what can I maybe let go of?
Yeah. Well, I think both. You mentioned the joy and utility. They're both good indicators of what stays and what goes, if that's useful to you. So if you're like, you've got books, I can see you don't have boxes all around you full of books. So, it doesn't mean that they're not off to the side.
They're all on
Uh,
shelves, I promise.
so I guess, when I'm having conversations with even little kids who love books, for instance, we'll use books as an example. If they're getting to the point where it's not allowing you to live the life you want to lead, then
Mm,
then joy isn't necessarily the best indicator, because it's also getting in the way of you, getting around your house or
ah,
what have you. So I'd be asking you, well, where do you see your book collection going? And again, just using the books as an example. If you books is something that you'll continue to read, well, assuming you're going to keep reading books, your book collection is going to keep growing. Um, let's just say we cover your walls with bookshelves throughout the house. Each wall has a bookshelf. Did I say that right? Each wall has a bookshelf. Yes.
yep.
And now you're out of room. So do you choose to let go of books, or do you upgrade a house to a bigger house, which is going to cost you more money, which may mean that you're not meeting other life goals,
Mm,
to accommodate your joy of books? So it really, and the answer might be yes, I'm more than happy to have a bigger debt to have my book collection. Or it might be, actually, I was looking at downsizing, because if I had a smaller house, I'd spend less on the mortgage and I'd be able to do A, B, and C. So, okay, I actually want to let go of books, and that's going to be
mm,
painful, but I'll do it anyway, sort of.
mm. So it's like the almost like a checks and balances system. Like we're checking in with our joy, but we're also kind of balancing
Mm,
it out with the life that we want. I love
yeah.
that. That's a really interesting way of thinking about it. And I had to laugh when you said, the kids, because this is what I would actually love to talk about this for a minute, actually, because my kids just have so much stuff. And I think this is a very modern day problem that, I would suspect that all of my friends have the same problem. But I have one child who's quite content to kind of let things move on,
Yeah.
and one child who literally everything is precious.
Yes.
I used to run, like yoga classes from inside the house, and I had a lot of props left over from that. And just the other day, I sold like a bunch of folding chairs on Marketplace and got rid of them.
Yep.
He was so distressed by that. Like he was visibly upset by the fact that I was getting rid of these chairs, even though he doesn't use them, Um, And so I'm curious from the perspective, and his, it's so hard to get rid of toys and things like that.
Hmm.
And it's not really just kind of related to kids, but how do we deal with that emotional distress, I suppose, of parting with things that did mean something, but we know are no longer part of the story that we want our life to be now.
Yeah.
I feel like that's the thing that kind of sometimes will just put the brakes on the whole process. Like, I know there's been times where we've been decluttering the kids' rooms, and that real distress has
Hmm.
been what's made me go, you know what, this isn't worth it.
Yeah.
Or for myself too, like finishing this room, there's a lot of stuff in here that's just very sentimental or has connection with, past study and things like that.
Hmm.
And it's enough to make me just be like, boop, not doing it anymore.
Yeah.
So do you have tips around how to like navigate? We've sort of made that decision that, yeah, this doesn't fit in with the life that I want moving forward, but I actually do feel some level of discomfort, distress, sadness. How do we navigate that, or how do you navigate that with clients?
Yeah. Well, there's probably quite a lot to that answer. Let's see how many I can cover off.
Yes.
So, I mean, yeah, there's emotions to a lot of our things, and that's why when often when I have outside parties sort of talking to me about hiring me to help somebody, they're like, "Oh, don't you just come in and fill bags with stuff and leave? Like, isn't it just why does it take so long, or why have you taken so long?" It's like, because there's a lot more underlying the stuff than you realize,
Yeah.
and we have conversations through that. So if you don't have a professional organizer to come in and help you, then when you meet one of those items that is causing some distress or feelings, and you sort of want to let it go but you can't, then first I'd just say, can you give it some time to sit with it and digest that emotion? Maybe you might do some journaling, or you might talk to somebody about it, why you can't let it go. What does it really mean to you? Because sometimes, and you touched on having old study notes and those types of things. Sometimes you're not just processing the handouts and the folder that they've given you at a conference or something, and the learning that's there. You're also processing maybe that you didn't read it all and you would have liked to have implemented it, or it's got ideas inside it that you want to also take on board, or if it was something you did through a previous job, there's all of this emotion potentially about a promotion you didn't get, or someone who was bullying you at the time in the office, or so there's sort of things to process and let go of before you can let that go, or there's actions associated with those work type of ones. So first I'd say, can you take that time to just journal, think about, sit with, and for those that do things like tapping or talk to a therapist or whatever about it, if it's a bit more meaty, tapping you can use for anything. So you just be saying a phrase that you would use with clinical EFT, for instance, might be, even though I really don't want to let this go right now, I'm okay. And then you just tap on the points and you're telling your body it's all right to release this, essentially, while you're verbally saying, I'm not okay to release this. I don't want to let it go. And that will sort of, tapping can bring up other things that might be tying you to that particular item. So that's another way that you could look at letting things go. And I guess the other thing is to be okay with not letting stuff go. Sometimes you're just not ready to let things go. So a good example of that would be when people have lost somebody. They get an influx of stuff from that person when they've passed away, or a relationship's broken down or something like that, and it's just too hard to even look at it because it's an extra level of the grieving process, for instance. So and really the things that you're letting go of your own is potentially a level of grieving of your own past life. Not a past life in the
Yeah.
in
Things that
that
have happened.
sense, but
Yeah.
you know what I mean. Yeah. So so they're the sorts of things I get people to, I guess, at least consider and think about when they're they're finding it difficult to let things go. That you don't have to let go of it. And sometimes it's the 2 years down the track, you look at that thing again and you're like, oh, I can let that go now. I don't know why I was so concerned about letting
Mm,
it go at that time. But
yeah.
time, what's that phrase? Time heals all wounds or something. So
Yes, I've definitely had that experience with getting rid of things where, and to come back to the kids' stuff, sometimes like, this particular drawing or something that they've done, I'm like, there's no way I can get rid of that. And then a
yeah,
year later, I look at it and I'm like, definitely don't need to keep this.
yeah,
It's interesting how time can change our perspective. The
yeah,
thing that strikes me too is that willingness that we have to be uncomfortable through the process.
mm,
Um, you know, with the promise of there being a sense of space and lightness and things at the end.
yeah,
Um, and so that persistence to kind of like see it through, I think. That said, if people are doing this on their own, working through whether it be like a drawer or the schedule or the cupboard, do you have any tips around like actually persisting? Because I feel like we so often get to the 80% or 90% done phase and then we just like walk away.
yeah, yeah.
What is that? Why do we do that? And what do we do to like get over that last 10%? Why do we do that? It's such a bizarre human trait, but we all do
Yeah,
it.
well, look, I don't know how to explain this other than the way that it was explained to me quite some time ago in a meditation spiritual group.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and it had to do with some people who have learnt an instrument or do music might understand, but they say that there's the octave and the 8 sounds in an octave, and when we do anything, we follow that octave in life, in everything that we do. Um, and then there's the two little half notes.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if you do music,
I'm
Erica.
so non-musical that
I'm not
I'm
either.
just going to
So,
nod.
so I'm probably like butchering this right now. But and in this spiritual term, they called it like the retardation points, where there's these two half notes, and it's
Right.
where we sort of get tripped up.
Mm-hmm.
Basically, it's really challenging, and I think it's sort of in like 1.5 notes in, and then 1.5 at the end. So it's really hard to get started for some, and then it's really hard to end and finish something. So it's if you're the reason why I'm telling you this is if you're aware of those points, then you can go, here I am at this point at the half note.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if the other term is politically correct or how that works. Sorry if it's
Yep.
not. The half note is really just a challenging point for
Yes.
you, and if you're aware of that, then you might just push through a little bit more.
Mm.
um, Real, like, in watching people declutter, and in any point where I see people get stuck with this type of thing, it's just because you're right at the end. It's like, is this enough? Can that be enough? Like, I'm just ready to walk away. And
Yeah.
with the process that I follow, I usually recommend that people structure their time so that when you reach that point, because it can often be like a fatigue, and like decision fatigue, just physical tiredness, to observe when that's happening if you do get to that, and actually like set your decluttering session to be below that amount. So just say
Mm.
you mentioned that I had the weekend and I was going to do all of these things, and I got to the office and I got through some of it, but then I sort of went. So that was probably that half note,
Mm.
and it might be like, okay, well, you're capable of potentially powering on for a day and a half. Let's just plan it for a day, actually,
Yeah.
and get through what you can in that, and then that success that you have will lead you to want to be doing more and feel motivated to do more next time without hitting that full over
Yeah.
point where it's just too much to go on.
Yeah, that's such a good point. And the thing that it makes me think of is how vital and valuable it is for us to understand our own rhythms, our own bodies, the signals that are coming from, our bodies and ourselves to be able to go, you know what? This is the moment that I need to pause. This is the moment when I need to go get
Mm.
a cup of tea. This is the moment when I need to call a friend and talk through this
Yep.
challenge that I'm having with this particular item. Um, it's interesting to me that there are like a lot of parallels with things outside of the decluttering and organizing world, but that is
Yeah.
often the way that these things are, that what we can learn through that process will shed light on so many different areas of our lives. And I think that it's really similar to kind of reading the signals of like when we are just straight up on the verge of burning out, or on the verge of being really exhausted, or any of those things. It's having that capacity and that ability, and that taking that responsibility, I guess, for reading those signals and
Mm.
responding to them. So that's really valuable. Thank you for that. um I had a little thought that's just jumped out of my mind. um of course, anyway, that's okay, it's gone. Anything that we haven't covered that you sort of see as being kind of like vital to this kind of conversation around um, decluttering and organizing for our self-care?
Yeah. For self care specifically, I know that there was a few questions you had that we hadn't yet covered, so I'll go back to those. Um, I think one of the like for self care to me, I think also like meditation and things.
Mm.
And I've once thought that to me decluttering is a bit like a meditation, because just like if you've done the types of meditations where you give your attention to your breath or a mantra, or um, you're watching your thoughts, and you sort of watch them go by a bit like a cloud, and then try and bring yourself back to the present, like a sound or something
Mm.
like that. Um, Decluttering's it's like that. You're holding an object, you're giving attention to it. You observe where your thoughts go with that object, the feelings that you might be having, the desire to, if it's papers, to shuffle through those bits of paper, instead of giving that piece of paper on top of the pile your attention and to make a decision on it. Um, that's that practice of, here I am with this. Oh, I'm drifting. I'll come back to it.
Mm.
And that, like, again, sort of from a spiritual perspective, it's that working with the working surface. So the working surface being the item in your hand. If you're writing, it would be the pen nib touching the paper, that type of thing. So you're really giving quite conscious energy to what you're dealing with, and building the muscle of being able to discriminate what you're giving your attention to. So
Mm.
uh, that in itself is a practice. It's for those who meditate know that that can be exhausting sometimes, but when you get it right, you're like, yay, winning. I had a moment where I was present. So it happens
Yes,
with this too.
I really like that analogy. That's beautiful. And it can be so interesting as a human with a wandering mind to notice that it can be so hard to stay where you are, right? And to notice that we don't want the perhaps responsibility of like making the decision about what we do with that thing.
Yeah.
Um, and I imagine that with that comes more potential for self confidence in like
Mm.
the decisions that you make, right? Like there's the
Yeah.
self trust that comes with making a decision about what to do with something.
Yes.
um so I love that not only is the outcome of this process kind, and supportive of the life that we want, but the process of it can also be a practice of mindfulness and attention and connection with ourselves. I had actually never thought about it like that, and that's blown my mind. So that's amazing. I'm thinking about the different items that I have to declutter in here, and that's actually completely changed my perspective on kind of how to approach that. So
Mm.
thank you. I feel like that's a really big light bulb for me, particularly, and probably for some people listening too. So thank you for that. That's amazing.
That's okay.
I do have my eye on the time,
Mhm.
and so I want to kind of sort of move towards wrapping up. But I'm curious to know if you had to give like one tip for someone who was listening and is like, all right, Virginia has inspired me to take a mindful approach to organizing my life.
Yep.
But I am deeply overwhelmed by the fact that every room in my home needs decluttering. Every part of my schedule needs decluttering. My headspace is feeling quite, you know, cluttered and disheveled as well. How do we start? And yeah, that's probably enough of a question. Like, how do we start? Where do we start? What's your top tip if you have one?
Yeah. Yep. Look, I would start with the vision if you can. If you've sort of got an idea of, oh, this room is annoying me the most, then yeah, where do you start? There's no magical answer. I just say start, bottom left, or choose your thing. Is it top left, bottom left, top right, bottom right, and just work your way through systematically through that. I guess my main tip at all is really that time, being aware of your time and setting realistic time frames for yourself. And 5 minutes is much better to achieve 5 successful minutes of decluttering than 3 hours of looking at 1,000 items and they're not actually doing anything with any of those things. So 5 minutes, and I sort of call it the 60-40 time split, where you split that time 60-40, or I think it's technically like, 2/3 and 1/3 or something like that, if your brain works better with those sorts of things. So with 5 minutes, you'll do 3 minutes of looking at, things on your desk, and you're just working through top left of the desk and picking up one item and deciding, if it belongs in the room, putting it away where it belongs, giving it a home. If you, those things you shuffle usually are things that you don't have a home for. So making a home for that item and then moving on to the next one and then the next one. I do a tub method, and so that last 2 minutes is really dealing with, if you've put something in aside for rubbish, that the rubbish goes out to the rubbish bin, that the recycling goes to the recycling bin. I have a tub that I recommend that people use called the other room box. So it just means that instead of zigzagging through the house, if you're just decluttering that top left corner of your desk, if you find a pair of scissors that belong in the kitchen, you put it in the other room box, and that last 2 minutes of your 5 minutes is bringing the other room box to the kitchen and putting the scissors in the kitchen drawer or wherever it belongs. Yes. So, that last 2 minutes is processing the things you have made a decision on in your window of time, and getting them away and having made decisions on those. Because like I said, you're better off making a decision on, 5 to 10 items than you are looking at thousands and not doing anything with them. So
yes, all 30,000 that your house possesses. Yeah, that makes really good sense. I have what is kind of like another room tub. It's called the bottom step. And everything goes on the bottom step to make its way up to the top of the stairs. It is remarkable, though, how much time can pass before I will physically pick that thing up and take it up the stairs. And so your point there about like finish the job, but keep it simple. I am so about that simplicity, and the 5 minutes spent is so much more valuable than the 3 hours that you sort of think you need but never get to, or whatever, when it comes to movement and self-care and things like that. So I'm glad that we can do decluttering and organising in 5-minute blocks. It feels a lot more palatable for sure. I know we didn't get to really talking too much about the emotional freedom technique or the tapping. I know you touched on it. But do you want to say anything more about that, or is that too big a topic to dive into at this point?
I've sort of mentioned a little bit about it. It's a peer-to-peer type of modality. So it's something that once you learn it, you can do it on your own. It's essentially for those who are just listening and not looking, you're tapping on points on your body, usually your face and under your arms and things. There are other points, but when you're doing a session, you're tapping on the points I'm doing now. And so it's sort of tuning your body into these meridians in your body. They're scientifically proven. It sounds like a bit woo-woo and out there, but it's scientifically proven to reduce your cortisol and stress levels by, I think, 37%. There's been plenty of studies on it helping with lots of physical and mental illness. And essentially, you can, if there is any emotion underpinning anything going on in your life, you can use EFT for it. So once you've learnt the points, you can go ahead and do it at any time on your own. If you're working through some bigger things, or you feel like you're not getting shifts with stuff, then you might work with a practitioner just to guide you through that process, just like anything else in life, I guess. And yeah, and you can tap on it for like beliefs, so core beliefs that you might have, like I said, pain and stress, that type of stuff. Traumas for some as well. So some people have had really good effects for PTSD and that type of thing as well. So and I personally find it like a bit like a meditation. It's my self-care. I love doing it on my own and with practitioners as well. So if you haven't heard of it, go and have a look. There's different types, and you can get like free videos and stuff on YouTube, and they're very general to keep you safe. Because you don't want to be spinning out into something that's out of control, and then not having a practitioner there to support you in it. But clinical emotional freedom technique is the type that I do, and Dr. Peter Stapleton here in Australia is I think the leading EFT researcher in the world, not only Australia, I believe. So she's created something called evidence-based emotional freedom technique, which is, it's the same, but an Australian model, I guess, for those here in Australia.
That's awesome. Yes, I have used EFT with a coach of mine and found it incredibly useful, but I'd never ever sort of thought about it in terms of organising and decluttering. So what a versatile tool. So cool. Virginia, this has been wonderful. Thank you so very much for joining me to chat. I'm not joking when I say I've been like super excited to have this conversation. So thank you for saying yes. How can people connect with you or find, you mentioned some blogs and things. What would be the best place for people to connect and learn more about what it is that you do?
Yeah, so they can come and check me out on my website if they like. Should have it up to tell you where that is. You can, there's a free ebook that I've got as well on decluttering your wardrobe specifically, and it has like a little ebook and flowchart that you can use to sort of help you make those decisions on what you let go of. Awesome. And so that's at getwellsorted.com.au /wardrobe flowchart /. Awesome. Or they can join me in my WellSorted Facebook group if you're on there. I think it's just called WellSorted Group, and then it's got some words on the end there that I never remember.
That's all right. We'll put it in the show notes, so make it really easy.
Excellent. Yeah. So, and I guess if they're interested, just because you said, well, where do I start? Because that was a question that a lot of my clients had asked over time. I did create a decluttering card deck set that so if you're like, I really don't know where to get going, and that top left thing's still like, I don't know where to start in which room. So yeah, you just shuffle the card decks and choose one at random basically, and that can tell you where to get started, or you can look through and choose an area that works for you. So for you with books, you could look at the book cards, and it'll give you some tips on how to get started through that.
That's cool. I love that. I don't know that I've seen those before. That's really cool. Amazing. Thank you, Virginia. Anything that you want to leave us with before we say goodbye?
Well, I feel like we should have another one sometime, Erica, because we didn't get to cover the kids' things and helping the kids declutter, and
All right, can we do it? Can we do a part 2 at some point?
Definitely.
I'd love that. Thank you, Virginia. This has been so much fun. And for those of you listening, thank you for following along. I will pop all the things that Virginia's mentioned into the show notes so that you can very easily click through and find her. And until next time, keep being kind to yourself, friends.